So the original title of our talk today was Permaculture and Aquaponics, the Future of Global Food Security, Community Health, and Self-Sustaining Communities. A very long title, but very fitting, as we do have a lot of information to share. So I chose this first slide based on its brilliance and the man who said it, or is quoted as saying it, or credited as saying it, Phil Mollison, who's the founder of permaculture, one half of the founders of permaculture. So the greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production. Even if on a small scale in our own gardens, if only 10% of us do this, there's enough for everyone. So that gives, a lot of credit to what we're doing here. The new generation of farmers coming in, it doesn't take a lot of people to make a community sustainable and to make it function. Next slide. I started with a nonprofit group called Rethink Red Deer, and this cartoon here is kind of indicative of my feeling over the years of about 5 years now of having been involved. So at the bottom it says, "My desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane." So if you follow my Facebook profile, you'll see why. Rethink Red Deer started as an informal action, I guess, by one of our community members in Red Deer named Lauren Daniel. And he's pretty much a lifetime Red Deerian. He had his own senior communications consulting business and has recently retired up to Victoria. But he was politically engaged from a very young age and went door to door handing out pamphlets for an election. That's how he got started. So we resonated because we both had an interest in the public good and in topics of sustainability. His was more specific to alternative transportation, pedestrian accessibility, cycling, bus, that kind of stuff. And so he put together a PowerPoint presentation himself, taking pictures throughout Red Deer and showing where inconsistencies were with pedestrian accessibility, so where sidewalks ended and where people had desire lines is what they called it. So when people walk on grass long enough, it makes the cattle path. And so they call those desire lines because they desire for there to be something more useful or less destructive. So anyways, he gave that presentation to the community, ruffled some feathers with engineering at the city and architects and whatnot, kind of criticizing this kind of car-focused or car-centered type of design to our communities, and made the point that, are we planning for cars or are we planning for people? We started out planning for people, but somewhere along the way, we started to give all of our energy over to the cars. So that's where Rethink started, and then from that we kind of talked and said, well, what do you want to do? Where do you want it to go? He's like, I've said what I want to say. I'm happy to help you do what you want to talk about. So at the time I was learning about sustainability and watched Inconvenient Truth, not taking a politician at face value. I started to do my own research. One book led to a documentary, led to conferences and workshops and training. So 5 years down the road, here we are, monthly programming, some social enterprise activities, just trying to raise awareness and give people an opportunity to reestablish their relationship with the things that give us life. So land, water, air, the very basics. If we can have strong relationships there, then sustainable community is inevitable. Next slide. I'm not going to show you, but there is about a 9-minute video of Lauren talking about Rethink Red Deer and where it came from and what drives it. And it is really driven by the passion of those people that are involved. We try and keep it organic for that purpose, that it's not something that people would say, well, that's not kind of what I'm interested in. The whole point is to bring your interest to the table, and then the society's there to give you the resources and the assets to actually get your hands dirty, to do something, as opposed to just sitting back and complaining or pointing out flaws and everything. So we'll skip that, but check it out on YouTube. So throughout the process, had to figure out, how do we organize? How do we engage people? How do we make this so that it's not just one big complaining session? So came across in my research something called transition towns. How many familiar with transition towns? Okay, good. In a nutshell, essentially transition towns gives a framework for communities to build community resilience, meaning that in a practical sense, it's giving them the skills that we used to have, that our grandparents had, and we're not passing down to the next generations. So how to grow food, how to produce electricity, how to manage a local economy. These are all things that our grandparents knew and great-grandparents knew and relied upon, which were all founded upon strong, healthy relationships. But now you can essentially stay at home, never leave home, and you can get anything you need delivered to you, ordered, whatever. You don't have to leave, you don't have to depend on relationships anymore. So it's a relationship-focused model for people to come together, build resilience to address the two main issues that we face today of climate change and escalating fossil fuel prices, or peak oil. So these three people here, I would call the founders. This is Rob Hawkins. He's credited most with the founding of the Transition Towns movement. He's holding in his hand a liter of oil, and he's got a really good TED Talk on YouTube as well if you want to check it out. But basically makes the point that the degree of dependence we have on oil is equivalent to the degree of our vulnerability. And the more that we rely on oil, as we are adamantly doing, the more vulnerable we become to the impacts of climate change and those escalating fossil fuel prices as it becomes a more scarce resource. And then below him are two friends of his. This is Naresh and this is Sophie. And they're, I don't want to call them supporting cast, they're just not in the spotlight as much as Rob is. They're probably equally important in the whole movement. So Naresh and Sophie are doing a lot of the training, going out across the world, engaging people that want to learn the Transition Towns framework and how to apply it. And so I did training with them in Stratford, Ontario a couple of years ago. And it basically gave me a sense of how to engage the community, how to host a session, how to explain topics that, particularly in Alberta, could be very controversial or provocative. So how do you address that? How do you deliver that message without putting people off and actually welcome them in to participate? Next slide. And so when you get those people together, what do? So what they've devised here, what Rob devised, is called a Transition Energy Descent Action Plan. So his hometown of Totnes in the UK actually made one, and it's about as thick as half a phone book. And it basically details their steps over the years of how they became more resilient or moved towards more community resilience. So again, renewable energy production, local food systems, local currencies. They've got the Brixton pound. They have, I think they call Totnes the nut tree capital of the world. So they gave themselves that name and they made it a reality. So they planted a whole bunch of nut trees around the town to now actualize and be that nut capital of the world. And it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing too, isn't it? So then, as I got really proficient with Transition Towns, looked at which component do I want to do, because there's so much to it that it's so overwhelming to carry all that weight. You're scrambling from one project to the next. So I wanted to focus on food for multiple reasons, but the first step I took in getting more familiar with the food scene was growing food security in Alberta's conference in 2009 here at Edmonton called Food Today, Tomorrow Together. It was at the Alberta Teachers Association building, which isn't far from here, I don't think. But that's where I really got understanding what food security is and food sovereignty and all the stuff we talk about with Food Secure Canada. So imagine Food Secure Canada at the provincial level. We kind of focus on the same things. So our work has been, over the last 10 years, it started through the Dietitians of Canada. And it has the support of quite a few volunteers and over 24 rural communities, all working on food security projects and initiatives to make themselves more resilient. The trick now is, connecting everyone to each other's efforts to understand that food security does not lie in food alone, that there's the energy component, there's the water component, there's the finance or the enterprise component or the economic component. So on the left there is a diagram. Can anybody guess what that is? System? Sorry? It's our global food system. And you have to really squint even up close to see it, but that's how complicated it is. Did we ever intend for it to be that way? Probably not, right? On the right here is a simplified model. Ebenezer Howard, who's long gone, but I think was a municipal planner, came up with a more biological approach to planning our cities, and he planned it around food. So they called something like this a Citopia, which means not utopia as this perfect place, but a Citopia, from Latin meaning a food place. That if we design our communities and our cities around food, they're likely to be far more simple and functional than this type of convoluted mess on the side here. So that's where we're at now with growing food security in Alberta, is making a system, or taking the permaculture ethic and practice and applying it to food system, food security development. So that's the next step from here. That was the next step for me. Our Cellars project, this is the name of our focused efforts, and we're using Lacombe as kind of our pilot community to apply our sustainable, equitable, local, and regenerative system for food model. So we've taken a community focus and brought together all the efforts that these communities are working on and have tried now to create a framework that, again, people can understand how to get their hands dirty, how to bring together their efforts to know that they're not having to work on their own or resigned to being overwhelmed with all the work that it takes to set up and be food secure. So local farms, working on a permaculture kind of ethic and cycling of resources using clean renewable energy, having local currency systems, and keeping it local, gathering our own food is a great common denominator. So this gets us now into permaculture. So transition towns, Rethink Red Deer, growing food security in Alberta. Again, I was feeling overwhelmed. Too many things. How do I simplify it? Came across permaculture, and at that Food Today Tomorrow Together conference, went out on a limb. They had an open space session. So for those of you that have had open space experience, basically you gather, you hold up the sign of a topic you want to talk about, and then you break out with those people that want to talk about that topic. So I, just learning about permaculture, figured I'm just going to go out on a limb here, held it up at the front of the room, thinking nobody's going to know what I'm talking about, they're going to think I'm part of a cult, some weird thing like that. So luckily, Rob Avis, for those of you who know him, was in the audience. He was just starting his business. He's probably one of the biggest permaculture designers in the world, I would even say. Came up and we connected, and from there I learned about permaculture. So permaculture started about 30 years ago as a design science. This is the other half of the founding team, David Holmgren, and Bill Mollison is the other guy, which we'll see on the next slide. But David here came up with a visual representation here of the permaculture ethic and all the design principles that support that ethic. So care for earth, care for people, return of surplus. Those three ethics form the foundation for permaculture, and then they're practiced through these design principles. I haven't memorized them yet, but I'll get there soon. So basically the design principles are thinking tools that when used together allow us to creatively redesign our environment and our behavior in a world with less energy and resources. So again, it's in line with transition towns. Food security is a big component of it, but it gives us a template, a practical framework for creating that sustainability and resilience. I was lucky enough through growing food security in Alberta to go to Australia for a couple of weeks, about a month or so ago, maybe 2 months now, time's flying so fast. I was at the Permaculture Research Institute in the Shannon, which is in New South Wales, the southeast corner of the continent. This is the Shangri-La of permaculture. So this is a 66-acre farm that's owned by Jeff and Nadia Lawton, and then there's Bill below there. So Bill is kind of the granddad of the permaculture movement. He trained Jeff married Nadia. Now these two manage this entire property, and they do farming plus education component to it, which becomes that legacy, that passing down of skills from one generation to the next, creating an entire family, I guess, of permaculture trainers across the entire globe. So this is the international ground zero of permaculture. So this was a former cattle farm, which was totally degraded. They came in 2006, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and started to turn it around. So the first thing they did was put in the water system. So in permaculture, the practice goes water access structures. Set up your water collection. Once you have your water collection set, you can start to put in your roads and pathways and then build your structures. You don't do it on order, you can end up flooding buildings, not be able to access all parts of your property. So that's really the design principle here, the water access structure. Next. So I took some pictures while I was there, of course. I was only there for 5 days, but I had to make the most of it. There is a video online too. There's an entire tour of the site. It's about 15 minutes, I think. Jeff does a tour around the whole property. But it starts from the top. It's quite a contoured property from the top to the bottom. I think it changes 30 meters in elevation. So I think he has 12 swales and dams, or what they're called. So a dam, everybody knows what a dam is. The swale basically is connecting the dams. So if you back up one slide for me, Dustin, you can see these what look like rivers. These are basically on contour, level pathways where when the water fills up and spills over, it carries down to the next. So as each of these fill up, they move down to the next one. So in Australia, where it's completely water deficient, it's the second driest continent in the world. Second to, anybody? Antarctica, if you can believe it, which is all water, right? frozen water. So they have to be very creative and smart about how they plan their landscapes. So back ahead. So collection dams. So that's basically done with a backhoe, excavated and packed down. I think it's just clay, and it's a natural water catchment system. That's near the top of the property. This one's right outside their front door of their home. This is called Paradise, and it's stocked with fish as well. So, and there's a kayak on a little pier. You can just go paddle around in it and fish. This whole piece of heaven there. And this one's a bit further down near where the cattle laneways are, where the cattle move around. And again, just part of that entire system, keeping it all connected and flowing. Next one. Moving down, further down the property, this is near the base, or the lower part of the 66 acres, and then at the very bottom is Terania Creek. So I was standing essentially in the middle here, picture to the right, picture to the left. This is right around sunset, so if this does it no justice, being there, it's like being in a completely different world, which it basically is, because it's never had an ice age, probably has the greatest diversity of any continent in the world. Really, really amazing place. Waking up in the morning, camping there for 5 days, you have a natural alarm clock. Birds come in succession, one after the next, and by the time they're all together, you've got this symphony that you wake up to every morning. So it was, yeah, it was amazing. Next one. So while I was there, why was I there? Well, I took a Permaculture Aid course. It was a 5-day course, and I got to take that course in the presence of the interns. So at the property, they host people on 10-week internships to learn about permaculture, actually apply it. So one of the courses that the students were able to take is called Permaculture Aid. And so the goal there is to create self-replicating demonstration sites, which will not only spread permaculture education worldwide, but also share knowledge and techniques between sites for the advancing of permaculture design systems themselves. So that, in a nutshell, is the Permaculture Master Plan. That's what Jeff has labeled it as. And so there's 3 particular ways to apply that master plan, or to support that master plan. In an urban setting, which is where I focus my attention. In a rural setting, which is more like a farm base, as Jeff and Nadia have done. Or large damaged ecosystems. So you could say, for example, see how it goes with the tar sands. That may be a large damaged ecosystem that permaculture could help to reclaim or to fix. And the real cool thing about it in Permaculture Aid is these sites are set up with the intention of having them financially sustainable in 3 years. So you're giving the people where these sites are set up the skills, the resources, the knowledge to not have to be pulling in constantly resources from outside. That system itself is self-contained. They've got their own local economy. They've got their own skills. They're a transition initiative in essence as well. This was me taking advantage of my political interest in diplomacy. Developing diplomacy skills here. So that's Jeff and me after the course was finished, and I was given a tip by a permaculture designer here in Alberta who actually worked alongside Jeff and was trained under Bill. It's Barb Hatzenveld. She lived there for quite a while in Shannon, which is just across the creek. She said, take some maple syrup. It's like currency there. Because I was looking for a ride to get from the airport to the farm, and they wanted $70 to do a 20-kilometer drive. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm not paying that much money. So I'm like, what are my options? She said, you bring syrup and you can probably get a ride for free. So I brought 3 bottles of syrup. I saved 1 for Jeff for the purpose that he would be encouraged to come to Canada. Because if you can believe it, this guy's world traveled. He's never been to Canada, not even once. He's been to the States many times and was just in San Francisco. He's never been to Canada. So when the course was done, I surprised him with a bottle, and I call it the Royal Order of Canada, the real Royal Order of Canada. And so we gave him a bottle of maple syrup, which apparently he's never gotten either. So we're in his good books, I hope, and we'll get him here maybe 2014. And the other part why I was there was for the Cellars Project, as I showed you before. Because growing food security in Alberta was started by dietitians, the dietitians of Canada, there was an opportunity to go to the International Congress of Dietetics, which only happens every 4 years. So it was held in Sydney, and so for the first 4 days of my trip, I was in Sydney attending that Congress with 2,200 dietitians from over 57 countries. So it's a huge event. I was one of the few men there. So we had a poster, which is down at our display there in the lobby area, with among about 200 others, and it was the only poster of its kind there. We used what's called graphic facilitation to put it together to kind of show what a local food system can be that's sustainable, equitable, local, and regenerative. Interestingly enough, there was a session on policy, food security policy for dietitians. And at the same time, Australia as a country and a continent, as I call it, their continental nation, was in the process of developing their national food plan. So they put out a green paper, they were hosting a bunch of consultations. Timing almost worked for me. They had 6 at the time I was there. One happened to be in Lismore, but it was a week before I ended up flying there to go to the Institute. So I gave some comments online. But I'm drawing a line here to connect with the People's Food Policy Project because it's very much a similar process, a similar paper. So in this session where they were talking about the National Food Plan and how it's focused more on industry than it is on the community or communities, I saw a great opportunity to tell them about resetting the table. Had the floor for about 5 minutes to explain it. Gave them copies of it with the website address, so they've got a connection now with Canada. Already as a Commonwealth nation, but seeing that we're facing the same kind of issues and same kind of challenges, that in our country too, it's very industry focused, but at least we have something already created by the people to develop our food security. Then, kind of going to take a step back in time, just it worked better for me to start global and come down to the local. About 2 weeks before I went to Australia, I was able to go to the National Urban Agriculture Summit in Toronto. Our city sponsored me to go, and it's an interesting scenario there because I'd written letters to our council, never getting any response back on the fact that Calgary's working on an urban ag strategy, Edmonton's working on an urban ag strategy, where are we? And didn't get any response back. The mayor has a bit of a soft spot for that because he's a farmer and a teacher and really encourages what it is we're doing with Rethink Red Deer and said, I'll give you money from our budget and you go to Toronto. And I said, well, thank you very much. I'd like to repay that by writing up a report. So after this assembly's done, I'm planning to submit a urban agriculture best practices report to them so that Red Deer can get on board with Edmonton and Calgary to start moving forward with the same energy. So anyways, in Toronto, this was the nation's first Urban Ag Summit, and they launched what's called the GrowTO Action Plan. It's based on 6 principles here. I won't go over them in too much detail, but essentially they're building an economic case around urban agriculture. So they're making it carry more weight, be taken more seriously, because most of the time that the mainstream hears about urban agriculture, they're like, whatever, that's a hobby, that's gardening, it's not going to have any impact. They're proving through this GrowTO Action Plan, which you can download from the Toronto Food Policy Council's website, that it is viable, it will produce results, it will generate income and skills and all those great things that communities need to be sustainable going forward into the future.